chosen ones. They were terrified the moment you were born, not because of who you were, but because of what your mind was wired to remember. Before the veils, before the rewrites, before the distractions that filled your plate and poisoned your thoughts, there was only one truth. All is mind. That's what they feared the most. Not your body, not your voice, not your rebellion, but your mind's original coding. They didn't just want to control you, they wanted to hijack the principle of mentalism itself. Because if reality is mental, then whoever shapes the mental field shapes the world. So they distorted it. They bent the law, they wrapped it in fake science, laced it with religious control, and drowned it in digital noise. They reprogrammed the cosmic operating system to reject your thoughts as irrelevant, unworthy, powerless. But your thoughts were never meant to serve this system. Your mind wasn't just a byproduct of the universe. It was the universe observing itself through you. Hermes Trismegistus whispered it. The ancients engraved it. And deep in the Kybalion's first law lies a code they hoped you'd never decode. The all is mind. If that's true, then the moment you reclaim authorship over your inner world, you bend back what they bent out of shape. But they knew this day would come. That's why they built layers of distraction. Scrolling feeds, trauma cycles, fear-baiting news, ego wars, food addictions, and digital mirrors reflecting false versions of you. Anything to keep you from realizing the trap is inside the thought, and the key is inside you. Before reality became a stream of notifications and programmed opinions, it was an open field of pure thought. The mental plane was not abstract. It was the raw structure of experience. Everything you see, hear, touch, feel, it begins in the unseen, and that unseen plane once responded directly to your thoughts, instantly. But then something happened. An interference was introduced. This interference wasn't random. It was a calculated distortion by entities who understood that if they bent the structure of thought, they could bend the world built by it. The first war was never fought with swords or fire. It was fought in frequencies. Beliefs were inserted like viruses. Words were redesigned to limit vibration. Language itself was reshaped to restrict access to the original blueprints. And most of humanity, unaware of the rewrite, was born into a cage made of concepts. Your real mind wasn't supposed to operate like this. It was never meant to be reactive, fogged by emotion, triggered by illusions. It was designed to be the source of creation, not the byproduct. But the distortions taught you to chase, to consume, to follow. They turned your mind against itself by flooding the signal with noise. What used to be a crystal clear frequency is now tangled in static. This static is everywhere, in systems, in schools, in family structures, in synthetic emotions. You're trained to look outward for meaning. But the moment you stop feeding the illusion, something ancient stirs. That stirring? That's the original signal trying to break through. The version of your mind that isn't clouded by programming. The one that doesn't question its own worth. The mental plane hasn't disappeared. It's been hidden behind layers of false identity. Each time you feel like something isn't real, like something's off, like the world is responding to you in strange ways, that's a glitch, a tear in the manufactured veil. And through that tear, the real world is waiting. But here's what they didn't expect. The original mental blueprint was never fully erased. It was encoded in your dreams, buried in forgotten symbols and mirrored in your deepest knowing. And something, or someone, has begun to activate it. When Yeshua walked among men, his words weren't just teachings, they were encryptions. Every parable was a vault, every phrase a cipher. The masses heard stories, but the few who carried awakened minds heard keys. He knew the law of mentalism wasn't just a spiritual idea, it was the foundation of all form. To speak it directly was to shatter illusions. That's why he veiled truth in metaphor. The kingdom of God is within you, a sentence so simple, yet ignored by those trained to seek externally. Why would he embed cosmic power inside a phrase so easily dismissed? Because he understood how thought had been hijacked. He knew how deeply the system had been rewired to make people doubt their own inner authority. If he said it plainly, the truth would have been buried under fear and doctrine. Yeshua didn't preach to inform. He spoke to awaken. His words were not lectures. They were vibrations, activators, echoes from a plane the false systems couldn't touch. He referred to the mind often, but not as the world defines it. He meant the divine imagination, the living blueprint that creates reality when aligned with higher frequency. He told his disciples, "If you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move,' and it will move." Not because belief is poetic, but because the mental plane responds to inner certainty. But belief was turned into ritual, and faith was reduced to blind obedience. They buried the principle of mentalism under layers of guilt, sin, and authority. The very forces Yeshua came to disrupt. He never pointed toward temples built by hands. He pointed toward thought, toward the realm where belief crystallizes into form. That was the real temple. And he knew if you mastered that, no force on earth or beyond could chain you. The moment you were born, they began the download, not of knowledge, but of illusion. The archons, those ancient architects of inversion, did not need to enslave your body. All they had to do was manipulate your perception. And to do that, they attacked the seed, belief. They wove illusions into the mental blueprint of the world so deeply that truth became unrecognizable, even when standing right in front of you. Their genius wasn't brute force, it was subtlety. They created systems of belief that appeared sacred, noble, even scientific. They installed ideas like scarcity, guilt, shame, and separation, then taught you to protect those illusions with your own mind. You weren't just tricked. You were trained to defend the trick. It started with education, then media, then language. They loaded every word with frequencies that fragmented thought. Impossible. Sin. Normal. Realistic. Words you speak every day, unaware they were engineered to shrink possibility. And while you were learning equations and history rewritten by victors, your inner vision dimmed. The principle of mentalism says that reality is mind-formed. But what happens when someone else inserts false thoughts into the field? What happens when the canvas of your imagination is hijacked by images meant to confine, not create? You get a world like this, technically advanced, spiritually bankrupt. A world of minds thinking someone else's thoughts. They were clever. They knew they couldn't destroy the mental plane, but they could overlay it, construct a secondary framework of belief, an illusion grid that sits atop the real one, You still think, you still feel, but your signal is bounced through their filter. And because the illusion reacts back, you believe it's reality. But every now and then, something slips through. A thought you weren't taught. A knowing you can't explain. A crack in the loop. That's not malfunction. That's the original plane bleeding through. That's your real mind remembering what it was before the overlay. Before the archons built a simulation on top of your spirit, there was a reason Yeshua's words were recorded and then hidden in plain sight. Among them lies one of the most potent activators ever spoken. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ. On the surface, it reads like encouragement. But beneath it is a transdimensional command. It wasn't metaphor. It was mechanics. A manual for unlocking the original mental frequency that existed before the interference began. The phrase didn't refer to moral behavior. It pointed to a state of consciousness, a frequency of thought unshaken by fear, time, or illusion. The Christ mind wasn't a symbol of one man's holiness. It was a field, an unbroken, creative vibration that reshapes reality through the sheer authority of divine perception. That field lives dormant inside nearly everyone, except those who remember. The world systems twisted this into submission theology. Be humble, be quiet, wait for deliverance. But Yeshua was not passive. His mind reshaped the fabric of reality everywhere he walked. He calmed storms, read thoughts, bent time. And he said you could too, if you unlocked the same mind within. That's why they scrambled to hide this principle. If you realize that thought isn't just influential, but sovereign, you'd stop seeking and start commanding. You'd stop doubting and begin speaking into form. You wouldn't ask the world for permission. You'd tell it where to move. This is the true threat of the Christ mind. It cannot be programmed. The moment you align with it, the mental grid begins to disintegrate. The false beliefs, the imposed limits, the fear-based patterns, they begin to melt in the presence of original thought. Thought not filtered through religion or science or culture. Thought that echoes directly from source. But how do you let that mind be in you, in a world engineered to distract, distort, and divide? That's the riddle. That's the hidden door behind the phrase. Because let implies allowance. It suggests the mind is already waiting, not needing to be built, only revealed. Long before organized empires, the manipulation of thought had already begun. The Anunnaki weren't just advanced beings. They were architects of perception. When they descended, they didn't conquer with weapons. They reprogrammed consciousness itself, not by force, but by shifting the mental framework through which reality was interpreted. They knew if they could shape how you think, they'd never need to chain your body. You would do it for them. The original human mind was crystalline, limitless, creative, in tune with the vibrational laws of the universe. Thought wasn't linear, it was spherical. Every idea pulsed in multidimensional resonance. But when the Anunnaki engineered early man, they introduced filters, logical structures, emotional traps, binary codes of good versus evil, worthy versus unworthy, seen versus unseen. They knew if you believed your thoughts were yours, you'd never question their origin. This was their masterpiece, invisible cages. You were taught to believe in what you could touch, even though the entire universe is structured around the unseen. You were conditioned to trust systems built on fear, even though your soul whispered otherwise. The Anunnaki installed programs into the collective unconscious, wounds passed generationally, echoed in stories, encoded in symbols. And with every generation, the mental field narrowed. Your thoughts now bounce within a limited bandwidth, never touching the edge of true possibility. They loop in trauma, desire, survival, rarely rising into the original frequencies that manifest new worlds. But the structure is artificial. Beneath it still lies the original blueprint. That's why some of your thoughts feel too big for this world. That's why dreams sometimes feel more real than waking life. That's your true mind brushing against the bars of its cell. They didn't need to hide the prison. They only needed you to forget it was a prison. And that's exactly why the anomalies are increasing. Déjà vu, glitches in conversation, prophetic dreams, sudden intuition. The mental cage is cracking, not because it's weak, but because you stopped agreeing with its walls. In the wilderness, Yeshua stood face to face with a force that offered him the world, not with violence, but with suggestion. It wasn't a battle of flesh, it was a war of thought. Every temptation presented to him wasn't random. It was targeted mental warfare. Turn these stones to bread. Throw yourself from the temple. Bow to me, and I'll give you all the kingdoms. These weren't mere tests of will. They were attempts to hijack his mental authority. Because if they could bend his thoughts, they could bend the timeline. Yeshua understood something the world still forgets. Thought is not passive. It's not internal. Thought is a command sent into the fabric of time. When a being like him allowed a suggestion into alignment with belief, the very structure of reality would respond. The adversary knew this and offered visions designed to pull his mind into co-creation with illusion. But Yeshua did not react. He responded. His resistance wasn't emotional, it was precise. He met each suggestion with a higher frequency of thought. Not denial, not fear, truth. He wasn't just denying evil. He was protecting the integrity of reality itself. This moment revealed the core of the principle of mentalism, that the shape of the world is born in the chambers of the mind. One altered belief, one compromised vision, one thought out of alignment, can bend entire timelines into distortion. Now, reflect. If you are made in the image of the divine, what do your thoughts shape? And who benefits when your thoughts are quietly hijacked by fear, vanity, and distraction? Yeshua's resistance wasn't about resisting temptation. It was about defending reality's blueprint from being rewritten, because every thought carries potential. Some reinforce the grid, some shatter it, some create whole new branches of possibility. They never feared your knowledge, they feared your imagination. Because imagination isn't daydreaming, it's blueprinting. Every empire, every machine, every revolution began as an unseen image in someone's mind. Imagination is creation before it becomes form, and the original you, the one beneath the programming, was designed to imagine realities so powerful they couldn't be contained by this matrix. So the matrix struck first. They made you associate imagination with childishness. They rewarded logic, obedience, productivity. They gave you tests with fixed answers and told you that truth comes from external validation. They filled your schedule with just enough distraction to keep your inner world dim. Why? Because the ones who imagine become the ones who shape. Imagination accesses the raw mental field. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need credentials. When you close your eyes and see, your brain doesn't know the difference. It reacts as if it's real. And that's the secret. They don't want you using that function consciously. Because if you did, you'd start to redesign your world from within. And the matrix depends on your inner world being hijacked. That's why media floods your mind with preformed visions. It doesn't show you life. It programs the dreams you're allowed to have. It manufactures futures, styles, ambitions, fears, all to shrink the infinite canvas inside you into a coloring book they designed. And every time you accept those images as your own, you give up the pen. But the pen was always yours. Your imagination is the tool that bends the principle of mentalism back in your favor. Not your status, not your past, not even your intellect. Just your ability to see without needing external confirmation. That's why dreams feel like messages. Why symbols follow you. Why ideas arrive uninvited and burn with urgency. It's not random. It's the original field trying to push through. And once you begin to imagine freely again, without fear, without approval, without limits, you reconnect with the source code. You've heard it 1,000 times. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. It's quoted like a proverb, printed on mugs, stitched into motivational speeches. But almost no one asks, what does it actually mean to think in the heart? And more importantly, why was the second half of that ancient wisdom buried? This phrase, originally rooted in Hebrew consciousness, wasn't describing casual thought. It was speaking to an alignment of two centers, the mental and the spiritual. The heart wasn't emotion. It was the energetic core, the seat of divine will. So to think in the heart meant to embed thought in the vibrational field of knowing, not just believing, but being. But over time, the wisdom was gutted. The verse was cropped, the meaning diluted, the power it carried intentionally blurred. Why? Because it revealed the secret too clearly. That man becomes not what he repeats, but what he fuses with in his inner world. Thoughts paired with conviction become reality. Yeshua hinted at this fusion often. He said, "If you say to this mountain, 'Be moved,' and do not doubt in your heart, it will be done." Notice, he didn't say believe in your mind. He said, do not doubt in your heart. That's where reality shifts, not from surface thought, but from thoughts forged in the furnace of inner certainty. And that was the threat. The elites couldn't stop people from thinking, but if they could sever thought from heart, logic from vibration, they could keep people looping in powerless reasoning. They made thought a tool of the brain alone, a system of analysis. But real thought, original thought, was never meant to be mental only. It was supposed to be magnetic. When you feel an image with certainty, and that image becomes clear, you begin to bend matter. The Kybalion opened with a simple truth. The all is mind. But what it didn't scream, it whispered. And within those whispers was a warning most readers never hear. It cautioned that the greatest prisons are not forged from steel or fire, but from thought. And worse, they often disguise themselves as truth. Mentalism isn't just a tool, it's a law, a living field that obeys the image you hold, So, when your image of truth is manipulated, your entire reality becomes a beautifully crafted illusion. The Kybalion didn't fear ignorance. It feared imitation, false awakenings, illusions of freedom where chains are simply painted gold. This is the game the architects played. They saw that the masses were waking up, so they built new cages dressed in mysticism. Systems that use the right language, energy, vibration, higher self, but funneled you right back into hierarchy, performance, and ego. Spirituality was turned into a brand. Enlightenment became something to chase, not something to remember. And what happens when you chase something already within you? You stay running forever. The Kybalion hinted that the principle of mentalism could be used against itself. That if you convince a mind it is free while feeding it pre-approved thoughts, you create the perfect prisoner, one who polices their own awakening. That's what much of the modern consciousness movement became, a loop of nice-sounding lies. Thoughts like, everything happens for a reason when injustice is designed. Just raise your vibration when trauma remains unhealed. Detach from the world when your purpose is to transform it. These thoughts sound enlightened, but they're mental opiates, beautiful, comforting, and blinding. The Kybalion warned, be careful what you accept as truth, because once believed, a thought becomes law within your mind, and law within your mind becomes law within your life. But here's the glitch. They can't force belief. They can only influence you to choose the wrong ones. There is a moment. It doesn't come with lightning or fanfare. It arrives quietly, like a strange stillness in the middle of chaos, a glitch in your attention, a sensation that something around you is constructed. You begin to feel like the world is responding, not randomly, not neutrally, but specifically to you. That's not imagination, that's alignment. The grid is noticing your signal. Reality, as it's been presented to you, is a feedback system, a mirror programmed to reflect what it's told you believe. But when your beliefs crack, when your mind begins returning to its original frequency, the system doesn't know what to reflect anymore. It falters, it hesitates, the programming glitches, and that's when it begins to unravel. Because the principle of mentalism isn't just about how you think, it's about how reality is structured. Thought forms the scaffold. So what happens when your thoughts no longer follow the expected code? The illusion starts to bend. People act differently. Timing shifts. Symbols reappear. Synchronicities multiply. Reality's mask begins to slip. The grid is held together by collective belief. But your belief acts as a master key. When one awakened mind starts thinking outside the pattern, it sends a ripple, not a metaphorical ripple, an energetic one. A frequency burst that distorts the artificial layer and begins to reconnect you to the real plane, the one underneath all of this. This is why they fear memory, not the kind stored in your brain, but the deeper kind. The cellular memory that remembers who you were before the scripts, before the systems, before the distortion. That memory isn't past, it's present, it's waiting. And once activated, it does more than restore power. It destabilizes the simulation. You were never meant to adapt to this world. You were meant to interrupt it. But interruption doesn't come from rebellion alone. It comes from remembrance, from knowing your thoughts are not just responses, but instruments of creation, blueprints, frequencies, weapons.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.